Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Some segments of the real estate market are in real trouble inside the pandemic. Others are substantially better off. Which are which? With some things that you've never thought about before. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell comes out and says it. We print money out of thin air. We are going to listen to him tell us that. Then the geography of real estate today on Get Rich Education. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They provided you with more loans than anyone. It's where I got my last few loans, and they finance single-family income property up to fourplexes. They're the number one lender for both beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and you'll end up with your custom plan for expanding your cash flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Plainfield, New Jersey to Plano, Texas, and across 188 nations worldwide. I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. Let's get you up to date on how trends are affecting the real estate economy both today and in the future. And then later today, it'll be the geography of real estate. This dispersed and largely suburban real estate, which we focused on here from day one, is really poised to be uptrending in the pandemic. Let's talk about some areas in the real estate market that expect to be strained first. College real estate, especially real estate that's in these smallish outlying college towns, that could all be in deep and irreversible trouble. Now, normally during a recession, what happens is that college enrollment increases. This is typically good for college areas. And the reason that's historically true is that since people can't find steady work in a recession, then they go back to college or they just stay in college longer. But in a pandemic, now that dynamic has been thrown into question because in-person physical college classes often can't be held anymore. Well, classes have gone remote and digital. Now, college students are increasingly asking the question, who in the world would pay up to $20,000 a year or maybe even $50,000 a year for these courses that you can take online? You know, for a decade or more now, colleges have marketed themselves partially on, well, come to our college, sometimes a wildly overpriced college, but come to our college to get the college experience. Well, I've talked before about how the cost of a college education has gone up while the value of one has gone down. But my point is, how long can universities sell the college experience? You've got to get this in-person college experience. Now that college classes cannot be held in person, some colleges are saying, well, yeah, we're just kidding about all that college experience stuff. You could take the classes online. You never really had to do any of that stuff, like relocate over here and get help moving a half-size fridge into a dorm room and playing intramural kickball for your residence hall. Why pay tens of thousands for the college experience when you can take so many quality classes online at a low cost or free at places like masterclass.com's $15 a month or free at the Khan Academy? Sheesh, at a traditional university, one textbook, just the textbook alone, can cost $100 or $200 or more. Are you nuts? College real estate is in long-term trouble. Now, you might still need to go to college for some majors, and universities still do hold the accreditation card too. I'm not saying Harvard Business School is going to close its doors and there won't be an upcoming fall semester anymore. I'm not saying Wharton is going to be gone in 1 year. I'm saying we might have reached peak real-world college in the United States, if you can call it such a thing. People are increasingly questioning why go and then why rent a house or an apartment near a university for taking classes. People can do a lot of this from home. college real estate is in trouble. As we know, many types of commercial and retail real estate are in trouble. That's obvious, and I've talked about it before. Much of that was in trouble even before the COVID pandemic. Of course, office real estate is in trouble too. For decades, I think to a lot of people, their perception was that a company that doesn't have an office really isn't even a company. Well, now nearly every company has a more distributed workforce. Yeah, the word distributed is a more genteel way to say work from home. Yes, it's a distributed workforce. Jack Dorsey, Twitter CEO, was one of the first companies in the pandemic era to say that Twitter employees can work from home forever. A number of other companies have followed suit. Really, what makes commercial real estate more troubled are their lease structures. Commercial real estate leases often last 10 years. Well, how many companies do you think want to make 10-year decisions right now? What about medical? Medical is another area that's typically recession resistant, but not so much lately. You might think that medical's safe. You think about the virus and respirators and all that, but not so fast. Doctors know that the more profitable appointments are routine checkups. The more profitable procedures are often the elective ones. Well, routine checkups and elective procedures, they're exactly the types of appointments that have disappeared. They've been deferred. My friend Adam, he was actually the valedictorian of my high school class. He's an eye doctor in St. Louis, just one of my longtime friends since childhood. And Adam hasn't been doing any business and he hasn't been getting paid either. I recently wanted to have my teeth cleaned, just a routine appointment with my dentist. And they said that I can't have it done until I have a COVID test. So the easiest thing for me to do was just go ahead and postpone that appointment for a little while. My wife is a medical assistant, and they're talking about furloughs and layoffs at their clinic. In fact, the budget is getting so tight there in that hospital system that they've implemented new procedures so that the lights aren't kept on as long, and they've stopped providing complimentary coffee service in the lobby. So medical is not necessarily well off, and of course, medical offices are a component of commercial plazas. So commercial real estate is problem fraught on a number of levels. Even with some reopenings, more people are at home. So you want residential, and oftentimes you want B class or even C class housing. My scale goes all the way down to D. People that have their hours reduced and income impacted, they move down from nicer class A homes. And those homes often didn't make sense for cash flow for you anyway. So with what we focus on here on the show, residential real estate, these 1 to 4 unit properties that are in lower cost parts of the nation have really been showing the recession resilience thus far. Let's keep some recession perspective with all this. Let's pull back for a moment, okay? In fact, since the Civil War, do you know how many recessions America has had? Yeah, we're talking since the 1860s, which is the last 160 years. Do you know how many recessions we've endured? Any idea? The answer is 33. Yes, we've had 33 recessions then in the last 160 years. Well, that's an average of one recession every 5 years. Recessions are common occurrences. GDP doesn't just keep growing unchecked. It feels kinda a little different this time because we came off an unprecedented 11-year run, an 11-year expansion. Yes, from 2009 until this year, 11 years, the longest economic expansion ever. Well, see, that was the unusual part. What was unusual was the length of the expansion. It's not that we're in a recession. Recessions are just a normal part of the business cycle. And you do know what happened in 3 of the last 5 recessions? Housing went up. Yes, residential again. Let's look at some other indicators. The Great Recession of 12 years ago, that was actually housing-centric. This recession is not. Back in 2008, some markets had 14, 16, even 18 months of available housing inventory. That symbolizes the excess supply that we had back then. Do you know what the phrase months of housing supply means, by the way? This is get rich education, not get rich talk over your head. What, for example, 18 months of housing supply means is that it would take 1.5 years to sell off all the inventory at the rate that transactions are taking place. Okay, that was back then. Well, today, nationally, we only have 6 months of available inventory, and that number is even smaller in these more entry-level starter homes that make the best rentals. And then making the number even smaller, we focus on the better markets here. So there's still that shortage of housing supply with what we're talking about. Now, a couple months ago, the CARES Act was enacted. I did a number of informative shows where we talked about how you make sure that the tenant pays you the rent and eviction moratoriums, and we discussed loan forbearance and tighter bank lending guidelines. I let you know then that more changes would be coming. One notable change is to mortgage loan forbearance. This is generally good news. And gosh, this just goes to show you how the government will just keep finding ways to continue supporting you if you either provide housing to others or you own housing yourself that you live in. Again, what forbearance means is postponement of mortgage payments. It does not mean forgiveness. The bad news with declaring forbearance because you can't make your mortgage payments is that it can make it difficult for you to secure future loans. Some good news is that later, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac clarified that their borrowers may defer all missed payments until the end of their loan, which will usually be decades or at least years. Fannie and Freddie will now allow borrowers who went into COVID-19 forbearance to refinance their loan, or you can buy a new home with the support of these government-sponsored enterprises as long as you've made only 3 straight months of payments after your forbearance ends. That's better news. That's different from the previous thinking that a borrower may not be able to get another Fannie Freddie mortgage for as many as 12 months after they exit forbearance. That number is now down to 3 months. They are some more recent positive tweaks to forbearance for those with real estate loans. Mortgage interest rates recently hit an all-time low again. Yeah, we're talking all-time lows. As long as Freddie Mac has been tracking them, which is since 1971, rates recently went below 3.1%. So here we are with rates between 3 and 3.1%, and that's often tax-deductible interest that you're paying there. That can mean your effective interest rate is as low as perhaps 2.5%. So you surely want to look at what you can refinance. But here's the interesting thing to keep in mind. Revisit those rent-to-value ratios of rental properties that you've either bought or the next ones that you're thinking about buying. Lower rent-to-value ratios make more sense now at these lower interest rates. If you were looking at a new construction property, which often have those higher purchase prices, it might have made your ratio of monthly rent income to overall purchase price as low as 0.75. But now go and revisit 0.75. See if it makes sense now with these low interest rates that you can lock in for 3 decades. Let's talk about federal interest rate policy then. You might know that in the last few weeks, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell went on the iconic news show 60 Minutes. He sat down with Scott Pelley and was asked about whether negative interest rates will be introduced to America. And then he was also asked if the Fed just basically makes it up and prints money out of nothing. Let's save you time here and take you to only the most interesting parts of the longer chat. Here's Fed Chair Jerome Powell on the prospect of introducing negative interest rates, which basically means that if you store money at the bank, you'd have to pay the bank to keep it there, which would incentivize you to instead borrow, spend, and help the economy. You'd rather do that than save. This is less than 2 minutes in length. Here's Jerome Powell.
I continue to think, and my colleagues on the Federal Open Market Committee continue to think, that negative interest rates is probably not an appropriate or useful policy for us here in the United States.
And why not? The president seems to think it would help.
The evidence on whether it helps is quite mixed. The issue is people would be depositing money in the bank and that money would be shrinking. They'd be paying interest to put their money in the bank. So It's not a particularly popular policy, as you can imagine. But in addition, it can also tend to depress the profitability of banks, which makes them likely to lend less, which weighs on economic growth. So I would just say it's not at all settled in in economic analysis that negative rates really add much value.
I think the idea of negative interest rates is something that a lot of people have a difficult time getting their head around. Would you explain it to me?
Well, rather than being paid interest on your cash, you pay interest to the bank. If you borrow money, they pay you to borrow money, and if you lend them money by putting it in a bank, then they pay you money.
So the banks would pay people to borrow money, essentially.
Yes.
And that would conceivably cause more business and commerce to happen.
It would, but this has been tried. We have negative policy rates in many countries around the world as a result of the financial crisis, and there's no clear finding that it actually does support economic activity on net, and it introduces distortions into the financial system, which I think offset that. So, there are plenty of people who think negative interest rates are a good policy, but we don't really think so at the Federal Reserve, and I think it's an area of real uncertainty in the central banking world.
All right, so negative interest rates are not likely to be a type of stimulus introduced. Now, currency, what we call money, that should be tied to something of value, and increasingly they are not, as dollars are continually created and pumped out to paper over the unemployment and the other problems unique to this recession. One thing that you've got to give Powell credit for is at least he comes out and says this stuff, right? Remember in the past, former Fed Chair Alan Greenspan spoke in all these convoluted and confusing terms, such that you didn't really know what he was saying? Well, if there's one place I'll give Jay Powell credit, he gives it straight to us. Here in this clip of only about 30 seconds, courtesy of 60 Minutes via CBS News, you're about to hear something that you won't soon forget. Here it is.
Fair to say you simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it. We did.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally, and we do that by buying treasury bills or bonds or other government guaranteed securities, and that actually increases the money supply. We also print actual currency, and we distribute that through the Federal Reserve banks.
There it is. He basically told us that they create money out of thin air, and how they do it. They create money digitally and print currency. That really happened. From 49 years ago, when President Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, all the way to an admission from the Fed that it's money for nothing, money tied to nothing. So creating money, there it is. There's your future inflation. That's your cue to own real cash flowing, inflation advantaged assets. I have noticed a lot of blame toward the boomer generation for the massive debt bubble that young people are going to have to pay back. And I was a bit confounded when I hear this blame, considering the unpayable debt has been mounting during the years that many of these same young people have been voters. President Bush doubled the national debt from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. Obama doubled it again from $10 trillion to $20 trillion, and Trump is going to take it to $30 trillion just by next year. It'll probably be $40 trillion again in a few years. They're doubled again. Some people seem to be demanding more government-paid services, but yet at the same time, those are the same people that are angry at the mounting debt, and that does not make a lot of sense to me. Unfortunately, the stimulus money that is being created is often paid back in the form of inflation. More money circulating tends to drive up those prices. Now, this is good if you own assets like real estate, and really not good for people renting or trying to pay for basic necessities and struggling to do it. Money printing deepens the divide between the wealthy and the poor, and it's happening right now. Right now, it's never been happening more than it has been lately. So as the divide deepens, you want to be on the right side of this. We're telling you how on this show all the time. Yes, there it is again, that inflation triple crown that you win as a real estate investor with that long-term fixed interest rate debt. We've talked about real estate segmented by use type today. Now, what about demographic segmentation with respect to urban, suburban, or rural? Well, you've probably heard of Redfin, the giant real estate brokerage. Its CEO, Glenn Kelman, recently made some remarks to CNBC about this potential exodus to people from inner cities moving out to more rural areas in order to increase social distancing. Now you've also had riots in many inner cities that make suburban living look more favorable as well. This is more than 3 minutes in length. Let's listen to Redfin CEO Glenn Kelman's recent remarks about a potential exodus from large, expensive cities to more affordable places.
Is your forecast that the market will dramatically improve? Because that effectively is a bet on the consumer, is a bet on the economy, and a bet that this historically high unemployment rate will return to normal.
Well, I think it's a tale of two economies right now. The people who have lost their jobs are not the ones looking for houses, but housing has in some ways become a luxury good in America. Most affluent Americans are the ones who own homes. Home ownership rates are down about 10% since the great financial crisis. So we're seeing the people who have money buying houses in force and the inventory just being very low. So there could be another shock to the economy. Everyone's worried that this coronavirus will come back in force. And if that happens, I think it'll really take its toll on the housing market. But for now, buyers are coming out of the woodwork, and sooner or later that will lure sellers into the market just because it's driving prices up. People are gaining confidence that they can put their home on the market and really sell.
You look around the country, Glenn, and where do you see markets that are going to be in trouble and distressed potentially, and where do you see the opportunity?
Yeah, well, I'm worried about the big cities. If you look, Americans who are working from home for the first time, 1 in 4 say they're not going back to the office. And half of those people say they're not going to pay the rent to live in New York, San Francisco, or even Seattle. So we expect there will be something close to an exodus from these really large cities where housing is so expensive to places like Charleston or Madison, Wisconsin, or Boise, Idaho, places where it's just more affordable and you can still walk around town a little bit. That's where the search traffic has already shifted on our website. If you look where people are searching on redfin.com, it is overwhelmingly in small towns. And that's even when the search traffic is coming from the big city. So that's what I'm most worried about, is that the big cities really have to get it in gear to make housing more affordable, or people are just going to go.
You know, there have been so many dire predictions in the past regarding New York City specifically and the real estate market, Glenn, as you know. I mean, after 9/11, they thought that the real estate market there would be gone, and nobody would want to live in New York City anymore. And then look where it went after that in terms of luxury building and the influx of residents. So, I mean, how confident are you that this sort of prediction is going to hold true this time around? What has changed that makes it more resonant?
Well, I think 9/11 was this incredible event that made people question whether they wanted to live in a big city, but it wasn't as durable as what we're going through now. There was an affordability crisis for 5 years before this pandemic. And if you look at New York, it was losing people to Philly. Boston was losing people to Rhode Island and New Hampshire. Seattle was losing people to Portland and Austin, Texas. So the major cities were already losing people prior to the pandemic. And some of that was because of virtualization, where folks were telecommuting from other cities. And now I just think it's a really strong trend that people are going to stay at home in some cases. I can't wait to get back to the office. Not everyone's going to do that. And I love cities. I live in the center of a city. I love New York too. So I don't want to bet against those cities in some permanent way, but I do think that the search traffic and the long-term trend are both pointing in the same direction, which is outside of town.
Yeah, this migration is something that I mentioned on the show a while ago. I don't think that there will be an exodus, if I had to guess. The word exodus means mass migration, and some media sources like using that word because it gets attention. But the migration trend from urban to suburban does portend well for a lot of these single-family homes that are out in an MSA's periphery, away from the central business districts. I think that's a more general trend. Exodus is a bit much. So this suburban dispersed real estate, they are many of the same properties that you'll find where I buy my own income properties myself. That is at greturnkey.com. In summary, I think that these trends and the work from home trend will help decentralize these superstar cities, but not to as great of a degree as some people are predicting. I think what's more obvious is that the tech titans, they're going to emerge from the crisis stronger. We're talking about Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Netflix, and so on, because they have platforms that remotely connect people. Automation, which had already been on the increase, is going to surge, and this could impoverish young people that were food servers and that were cashiers. And that's where this widening divide that I mentioned earlier could manifest itself. That's what I'm talking about. Those people don't have the wherewithal to grab any substantial amount of real assets with a good loan like you can and like hopefully you are. Now, in the pandemic, some landlords and property owners have been enjoying the fruit of basically having government subsidized housing payments. Yeah, when you think about how tenants got the $1,200 stimulus checks and unemployment compensation that is even greater than what they were paid if they were at work, well, landlords that have Section 8 tenants, they've been getting these government subsidized housing payments for years or even for decades. So coming up on the show in the next few weeks, we're going to look at the pros and cons of this government subsidized Section 8 housing. Also, I'm going to do an episode down the road on, now, why exactly is money a taboo topic? Like, how did this all get started where everyone is so secretive about how much money they make? Why exactly is talking about money that way taboo? So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at some cultures about where talking about money in those cultures is not a taboo topic. It's openly discussed about how much money you make. Also down the road, for only the second or perhaps third time in Get Rich Education history, we're going to have a member of Generation Z here on the show. Yes, that's a generation younger than the millennials. I've seen some people refer to this generation, born after about 1996, as the Zoomer generation. Well, you must be wondering, what can you possibly learn about real estate investing and wealth mindset from a 24-year-old? You're going to see, and I think you're really going to be surprised. Much, much more great stuff coming up in future Get Rich Education episodes here, including revisiting investing in real estate on the debt side. That is a nice, clean 8 to 10% return paid to you in cash where you're the bank and you provide a loan in first lien position with real estate as your collateral. What are the pros and cons there? Later on the show today, I'm going to talk about the geography of real estate. One of my degrees is in geography. It's actually a pretty easy major that I had, but it's just what interested me in college. Geography and real estate are both about location, location, location. So why haven't I talked about this more before? Well, I will in just a few minutes here. If you're going to be involved in real estate anyway yourself as an investor, please consider doing business with our show sponsors this week. There's Audible audiobooks and Ridge Lending Group of Portland, Oregon, and JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida, and the EQRP company based in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Ridge Lending Group specializes in investment property loans of 1 to 4 unit properties, so they know just what you need. It's where I did my last few loans. Get started at ridgelendinggroup.com. The EQRP company helps give you access to your retirement funds so you really can use them for real estate and other real assets. To learn more, just text QRP in all capital letters to 72,000. I'm coming back with the geography of real estate here on Get Rich Education. NewConstructionTurnkey.com. That's where you can get investor advantage new construction turnkey property in Northeast Florida. Here's more on them. Property investors can get killed with maintenance costs. That's less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in bustling Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental property. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, start now at newconstructionturnkey.com. Finally, with Total Control Financial, get checkbook control of your existing 401k and IRA funds to invest in real estate. Yes, you can move your retirement money into your own checking account, but you must avoid the little-known tax that you'll get hammered with in a self-directed IRA. Instead, start your QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
This is author Kristen Tate. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Let's talk about the geography of real estate. Now, this is nowhere near a comprehensive geography of real estate. In fact, I'm going to skip around the United States map real quick here, but I really want to do this through the lens of clearing up misconceptions that a lot of people have about large-scale places, entire U.S. cities and states. So yes, then really large pieces of real estate. The definition of geography is the arrangement of places and physical features and human activity, including populations, resources, land use, and industry. That's what geography is. Yes, geography might be seen as a somewhat distant relative of real estate, but they both center around location. We're going to focus on the United States geography because I live in the United States and because most of the best real estate deals are here. But with a nod to the globe, first, I will ask you one world geography trivia question before we discuss U.S. geography. What is the world's most populated island? Yep, that's it. What island has more people living on it than any other island in the world? Your mind might shoot straight to Japan because of Tokyo, but it is not any one of the Japanese islands. It's not Great Britain. If you're wondering whether we're considering Australia an island continent or not, well, it doesn't matter because Australia isn't even close to the world's most populated island because, in fact, the world's most populated island has 6 times as many people on it as Australia has, even though this most populated island is less than 2% the size of Australia. Also, this world's most populated island contains one of the world's mega cities, one of the 5 or 10 largest cities in the world on this island. What is the world's most populated island? I'll answer that trivia question for you at the end of the episode to give you some time to chew on that. Here in the United States, some wonder, now, just why is the West Coast warmer than the East Coast? Why in the world, for example, does Seattle rarely get snow, although the state of Maine at the same latitude gets lots of snow and ice and cold? Well, that is due to wind patterns and ocean currents. Water in the oceans warms and cools more slowly than land does, so the temperature of water kind of stays in the middle. Land heats up and cools off quickly, closer to extremes. Because winds generally blow from west to east, the wind blows over the ocean, which stays at that moderate temperature. So when wind blows over the Pacific, it stays at that moderate temperature, blowing onto the west coast and therefore keeping the west coast warm in winter. Wind blows west to east over the eastern United States also, and that wind was blowing over land, which heats and cools faster. That is why West Coast temperatures are not exactly warmer than the East Coast, but rather more moderated. They're milder in winter, but not too hot in summer. Just take a look at Disney properties. Disneyland, which is in Anaheim, California, is at 34 degrees north latitude. But if the East Coast Disney World, were at that same latitude, that would place it in Atlanta, Georgia, or Columbia, South Carolina. It can get cold and sometimes snow in those places. So that's why Disneyland in the eastern U.S. would need to be further south, and therefore it is. It's in Orlando. Coastal Southern California has a climate zone considered Mediterranean. It doesn't get too hot or too cold. However, this does not translate into an area where the best long-term rental deals are, because if it's too desirable to live in, say, San Diego, California for the Mediterranean climate, real estate prices are too high for your numbers to work. They're too high proportionally to your low rent amount. Land areas close to water bodies are known as maritime areas. Land areas far from water bodies are known as continental areas. Then areas with a high degree of continentality, take Kansas City or Denver, which are far from large water bodies, therefore have big temperature swings seasonally. Both cities are far from those maritime moderating effects. While we're talking about maritime effects, let's talk about some cities that people think are on coasts, but are in fact not on coasts, though they might be close. None of these cities are on coasts. Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New Orleans, Houston, Orlando, Sacramento, and Portland. They're each a little ways inland. Then there are the U.S. cities that are on the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes freeze in the winter, though they can provide a small degree of this maritime influence in moderating cities' temperatures. Toronto, Ontario is on Lake Ontario. Buffalo and Cleveland are both on Lake Erie. Chicago and Milwaukee are both on Lake Michigan. Detroit is not quite on a Great Lake, and it is right next to the Canadian border. Property taxes by state are important to look at because after your rent-to-value ratio, property taxes and interest rates, they are the next two most important factors in your profitability. The northeastern states have high property tax rates. Pennsylvania is not so high, but New Jersey, New York, and all of the New England states have high property tax rates. Washington, D.C. does too. Other states with high property tax rates are Illinois, Nebraska, Texas, and Wyoming. And notice that I'm not talking about overall state tax burdens here, just the property tax. And I've named about the dozen or so states there with the highest tax rates. I won't talk about the parts of the nation that have rent control because I believe I discussed that on our rent control episode. If you want to listen to that, just go to, what you do is go to GetRichEducation.com, use the search tool in the upper right, search rent control, and that will take you to the episode, which is number 192. I also discussed there why rent control does not work and actually has a history of hurting the very people that it was intended to help. Now, when we look at the geography of New York City, the 5 boroughs by population are Brooklyn, that is the most populous borough with about 2.6 million people. Next is Queens with 2.3 million, Manhattan with 1.6. Then we've got the Bronx with 1.4, and finally Staten Island with about 500,000 people. Brooklyn and Queens, which are the 2 most populous boroughs, are both on Long Island. And Long Island, by the way, is America's most populated island. Remember, our trivia question that you're chewing on is what is the world's most populated island? Manhattan is on its own island. Staten Island is its own island. And the Bronx is the only New York City borough on the United States mainland. Now, on Long Island, you might hear about the wealthier set of people, real estate investors and Wall Street bankers from New York City, as having a second home or a vacation home in the Hamptons. The Hamptons is an area away from New York City. New York City is on western Long Island and areas west of there. The Hamptons is the treed and manicured getaway on the eastern side of Long Island, and it's given that name, the Hamptons, because some of the communities there are named West Hampton, Bridgehampton, East Hampton, and Southampton. New York City is one city where you'll find real estate air rights. Air rights mean that you own property in the space above the Earth's surface. Generally speaking, owning or renting land or a building includes the right to use and develop the space above the land without interference by others. Sometimes in New York City, you'll have a tall building that juts out over the top, protruding over a portion of a shorter building, meaning that the taller building has some of the air rights over the shorter one. We're talking about the geography of real estate here as a segment of Get Rich Education, episode 296. Near the center of America, the vast Mississippi River system, which is the largest, That overlays the breadbasket of the nation, the agricultural belt. This advantage of having a vast river system that even has navigable tributaries is that it only costs about 1/12 as much to ship or barge goods over water as it does to move them over land. Now, for example, even Sioux City, Iowa, which is on the Missouri River, a tributary of the Mississippi, that has good navigability all the way down to the confluence, which is in St. Louis, a distance of about 750 miles. The Mississippi River is a valuable water highway. Now, some American cities are sinking. Yeah, that's a real estate problem. New Orleans, Houston, Virginia Beach, and Miami are all suffering different rates of sinking. Areas of California's Central Valley are also sinking. Parts of New Orleans and Houston are sinking, yes, subsiding down into the ground at a rate of 2 inches per year. The geography of credit scores is pretty interesting. Yes, consumer FICO scores. The lowest credit scores are in many of the southern and southeastern states. This might seem paradoxical because many of these same states are the best ones for you for owning rental property. That is because low credit scores often prevent people from buying a home, and instead they become a renter. Texas is America's second largest state by area. It makes a lot of people think of cowboys. Maybe that's why people forget that Texas has a coastline and beaches. It is on the Gulf of Mexico, after all. Houston is near that area. Houston is not an arid place. In fact, Houston is pretty close to the western extent of bayou country. Dallas is prairie. The prairie extends from there up into the Great Plains. Prairies are enormous stretches of flat grassland with moderate temperatures, moderate rainfall, and few trees. When people talk about the prairie, what they're usually referring to are the golden, wheat-covered lands in the middle of North America. Utah and Nevada are two states that a lot of geographers consider unusual American places. They're both climatologically arid. Utah has a high birth rate as a function of the Mormon population. Mormons often identify with the faith as LDS. You'll hear them say that they are LDS. That stands for Latter-day Saint. Nevada is an even more arid state where all of the waterways, the few that there are, flow inland, not out of the state. California is a giant economy on its own. Most people think of beautiful beaches and coast, and it does have those things. But the highest mountain in all of the 48 contiguous states is not in the Rocky Mountains. It's in California's Sierra Nevada. It's 14,500 foot Mount Whitney. I climbed to the summit of Mount Whitney with my dad and brother in 2007, by the way. To call that mountain range the Sierra Nevada Mountain Range is redundant. That is because Sierra, a Spanish name, means mountain range. That's why they're simply called the Sierra Nevada. California produces a ton of agriculture in its Central Valley. From a cap rate perspective, California is one of the worst states to invest in real estate that I can think of. Add on to that a landlord-tenant law that favors tenants over owners, including it taking many months to evict a non-paying tenant, plus earthquakes make California really undesirable that way. But of course, you can find opportunity anywhere, even in California. In general, with the way that it works with insurance, you would rather make a hurricane claim in Florida than an earthquake claim in California. The Pacific Northwest is one part of the country that has a low population. You might forget this because Seattle tends to make the news since some high-profile companies are there, like Amazon and Starbucks. Seattle does have high real estate prices because it's confined to a geographic isthmus, but the entire state of Washington, the whole state, only has 7.5 million people, and the entire state of Oregon only has 4 million people. Well, the Philadelphia metro area alone, one city with its suburbs, has over 6 million people. By comparison, you think about fir trees in Washington and Oregon, but the central parts of those states, like around Yakima, Washington, are quite agricultural, and parts of eastern Washington and Oregon are deserts. Arizona was the 48th state admitted to the Union. But there really are a lot of misconceptions about the 49th state, Alaska, and the 50th state, Hawaii, which each achieved statehood in 1959. Alaska is by far the largest U.S. state by area. In fact, if you cut Alaska in half, both halves would be larger than Texas, and then Texas would only be the third largest state. One misconception is that many people think that there are 48 continental U.S. states. That is not true. There are 48 contiguous U.S. states. You might see the word coterminous rather than contiguous, but either way, both of these terms just mean that they're the states whose borders touch each other. There are, in fact, 49 continental U.S. states. This is because Alaska is on the continent along with the other 48. So Hawaii is the only non-continental state in existence. Alaska only has 730,000 people. Yes, less than a million in its vast area. That's just one person per square mile. It has some really remote areas. In fact, Alaska's capital of Juneau is a place that no one has ever driven to because you can't drive there. That's right, here in the 2020s decade, there is a state capital in a highly developed nation that has no road access. You must either fly or take a boat to Juneau. Hawaii, the last state admitted to the Union, has about 1.5 million people. It's one of my favorite places to visit. I think the greatest misconception about Hawaii is that Honolulu is on the Big Island. That is not true. Honolulu is on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. The Big Island has a smaller population and has the most active volcanoes, and the Big Island is where you're going to find the places like Kona and Hilo. Well, that's just a quick overview of the geography of real estate, and I really focused on clearing up some misconceptions. Of course, that's probably less than 1% of the things that I could talk about, but much of this is like a distant relative to real estate, so I don't discuss it that often. But if you like that kind of material and you want more, the best thing you can do is go to GetRichEducation.com, use the search tool in the upper right, and search Zion, Zeihan. As Peter Zion and I had a number of those geography chats on previous episodes here, and it was geography through a lens of what might be a good place to invest in real estate. Back to our geography trivia question. What is the most populated island in the world? The answer to that question is Java, with a population of almost 150 million people. Yeah, Java is easily the world's most populated island. So, of course, the megacity on the island that I referred to earlier is Jakarta, which some believe could be one of the world's 5 biggest cities today. Jakarta is the capital of the world's 4th largest nation. Of course, this is Indonesia. We discussed sinking cities earlier. Jakarta is sinking fast. In fact, the small Indonesian island of Java has more inhabitants than all of Russia, which is the largest nation in the world by area. Java has more people than Russia. That's something that probably surprises you. And yes, I didn't read that anywhere. I just know this stuff because I like geography and maps and globes and traveling. But in all my travels, I've really found that one of the best places to invest in real estate is here in the United States, and that is in the state of Florida. Rent-to-value ratios work, property tax rates are sensible, and the cost of your homeowner's insurance for a lot of these new construction Florida properties is really low because they build the homes to really stringent standards in these places where the numbers work, like Orlando and Jacksonville and Tampa. Your homeowner's insurance is often less than $500 on these new construction single-family homes, sometimes less than $400 per year for the property insurance on some of these. Now, interestingly, something new is our Tampa provider recently began adding new construction homes to their turnkey property where they had only done rehabs on existing previously. That's a new development at GRE Turnkey. Tampa now has new construction, so it could be a good time to tie up new construction Florida property. You've got these historically low interest rates, so the lower rent-to-value ratios now work, and you've got the ultra-low property insurance in Florida for new builds. I've done more buying in Florida myself these past few years than anywhere else, so Go to greturnkey.com and connect with our providers in Orlando, Jacksonville, and now Tampa for new construction property. All three have new construction. I'm Keith Weinhold, and I'll be back next week to help you build your wealth. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.